The envelope weighed nothing. That was the part I could not stop thinking about as I stood outside the county jail, waiting for a man I had met once to walk free. $312,000 reduced to a wire transfer receipt, a single sheet of paper that meant I no longer owned anything in this world except the clothes I was wearing and a suitcase I had packed that morning with what remained of my life. 2 sweaters, 3 pairs of jeans, underwear. A photograph of my mother that I could not bring myself to sell even when the pawnbroker offered me $40 for the silver frame. He had turned the frame over in his hands, examining the tarnish, and I had watched him and thought about how strange it was that grief could be assigned a dollar value, that the last image of my mother's face could be weighed against rent money and found wanting. I kept the photograph. I sold everything else. The February cold had settled into my bones in a way that felt permanent, as though I would never be warm again. I had not eaten since the previous morning, and my hands shook when I tried to light a cigarette, so I gave up and put the pack back in my pocket. I did not smoke anyway. I had found the cigarettes in the apartment I had just surrendered, left behind by the previous tenant, and I had taken them because I thought they might be useful for something. Trade maybe, currency for whatever came next. The doors opened at 4:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on the courthouse across the street, counting the minutes like someone waiting for a verdict of her own. He came out alone. This surprised me. I had expected lawyers, associates, the machinery of power that surrounded men like him. But he walked through those doors by himself, wearing the same suit he had been arrested in 3 weeks earlier, now wrinkled and carrying the particular exhaustion of incarceration. He did not see me. He looked up at the sky first, the way people do when they have been denied it, squinting against the pale winter light as though relearning the shape of clouds. Then he rolled his shoulders, adjusted his cuffs, and began walking toward the black car that was waiting at the curb. I left before he reached it. I had not come to be seen. I had come only to make sure it worked, that the money had done what money was supposed to do, that he was free. Now he was free, and I had nothing left to do here, nothing left to do anywhere really. I had erased myself to save him. And now I needed to figure out how to exist as a blank space. I walked for a long time that evening. The city felt different when you had no place to return to, no key in your pocket that fit any lock. Every doorway I passed reminded me of shelter I no longer had. Every restaurant window, fogged with warmth, showed me meals I could not afford. I had given up my apartment that morning, handed the keys to the landlord who had been waiting for an excuse to raise the rent anyway, and I had carried my suitcase to the bus station where I left it in a locker that cost $2 for 24 hours. $2 was significant now. Everything was significant when the entirety of your wealth could be counted in bills and coins that fit in a single pocket. The shelter was on the east side, a converted brownstone with a hand-painted sign that said women only, and a door that required buzzing for entry. I had looked it up 3 days earlier, when I made the final decision, when I signed the paperwork that transferred the title of my grandmother's house to the lawyer who had found a buyer willing to close quickly. The house had been the last thing, the only thing of real value, and I had been holding on to it for 12 years, paying the taxes out of my salary, keeping it empty because I could not bear to sell it and could not bear to live in it either. Selling it had felt like cutting off a limb, but the alternative had been letting him rot in a cell while his enemies circled, and I could not do that. I could not do that because of what happened 8 years ago in a diner on the south side where I had been working the night shift to pay for nursing school. The diner was called Rosie's, though no one named Rosie had worked there in decades. It had cracked vinyl booths and a counter that had been wiped so many times the pattern had worn away in spots, and it smelled like coffee and grease and the particular exhaustion of people who worked through the night because daylight hours belonged to someone else. And I had been 23 years old and still foolish enough to believe that hard work was sufficient, that wanting something badly enough could make it happen. I had been wrong about many things in my life, but I had been especially wrong about that. He came in alone, which was unusual for a man like him, though I did not know then what kind of man he was. I knew only that he ordered coffee, black, and that he sat in the booth by the window, and that he watched the street with the particular attention of someone expecting trouble. His suit was expensive in a way I recognized without understanding, the kind of clothes that fit like they had been made specifically for the body wearing them. His hands wrapped around the coffee cup were clean and manicured, but there was something in the way he held himself that suggested those hands knew work that had nothing to do with offices. I gave him the coffee and left him alone because that was what you did with customers who wanted to be left alone. I went back to wiping down the counter and watching the clock and counting the hours until I could go home and sleep for 4 hours before my morning classes began. The men came in around 3 in the morning. There were 4 of them, and they did not order anything, and they did not sit down. They stood by the door in a loose formation that blocked the exit, and one of them, the tallest, looked at the man in the booth and smiled a smile that had nothing to do with friendliness. The cook, Ramon, had already disappeared into the back. I heard the rear door open and close, heard his footsteps fading into the alley, and I understood that I was alone now with whatever was about to happen. The man in the booth set down his coffee cup. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. Then he looked at the 4 men by the door and said, in a voice that carried without being raised, "Gentlemen!" The tall one laughed. "Mr. Verano, you're a hard man to find alone." Not hard enough, apparently. "Your father sends his regards." Something shifted in the man's face, a flicker of something dark that came and went so quickly I almost missed it. "My father has been dead for 6 years. Figure of speech. The tall man reached into his jacket, and I saw the gun before I understood what I was seeing. Black metal catching the fluorescent light. His memory, then. His legacy. The thing you inherited and failed to protect. What happened next took perhaps 30 seconds. The man in the booth moved first, which surprised them. He was out of the seat and across the floor before the tall man could finish raising the weapon, and then there were bodies colliding and someone was shouting and glass was breaking somewhere near the front window. I dropped behind the counter, my hands over my head, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. A gunshot, then another, then a sound like meat hitting concrete and someone groaning and footsteps scattering in different directions. I looked up. The man from the booth was on the floor, struggling with one of the attackers, their bodies locked together in a way that made it impossible to tell who was winning. 2 others were down, not moving. The 4th, the tall one, was circling behind, raising his gun to aim at the back of the booth man's head. The knife was on the floor. I do not know how it got there. I do not know if it had fallen from the counter during the chaos, or if someone had dropped it, or if it had simply materialized in the way that objects sometimes do in moments of crisis. It was a kitchen knife, the one I had been using earlier to slice lemons for the water pitchers, and it was lying on the linoleum 3 inches from my hand. I did not make a decision. I picked up the knife, and I stood up, and I threw it. I had never thrown a knife in my life. I did not know how to throw a knife, but something in my body understood trajectory and force and the geometry of desperation, and the blade left my hand and turned once in the air and buried itself in the tall man's shoulder just as his finger tightened on the trigger. He screamed. The gun went off, but the shot went wide, punching a hole in the ceiling that rained plaster down on all of us. The man from the booth used the distraction to break free from his opponent, and then there was another gunshot, this one deliberate, and then silence. 4 men on the floor. 3 of them would never get up again. The man from the booth stood in the middle of the wreckage, breathing hard, blood on his shirt that might have been his or might have been someone else's. He looked at me, still standing behind the counter, still trembling with adrenaline I did not know how to process. For one long moment, he simply looked. Then he crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled the knife from the shoulder of the man who was still groaning on the floor. The man screamed again, a sound that would live in my nightmares for years. The booth man wiped the blade on the fallen man's jacket and set it on the counter in front of me. "You need to leave," he said. His voice was calm, as though we were discussing the weather, as though I had not just altered the course of his survival. "Now, before they arrive." I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. "I work here," I said stupidly. "My shift isn't over." Something flickered in, his eyes too fast to identify. "Your shift is over. Go out the back. Walk home. Do not run. Do not stop. Do not look back." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to survive." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of bills, pressing them into my hand. "This is for tonight. There will be more, but right now, you need to leave, and you need to forget this happened." I left. I walked out the back door of that diner, and I kept walking until I reached my apartment, and I did not tell anyone what had happened. The next morning, there was an envelope under my door containing $10,000 in cash and a note that said only, "This is not a debt, this is a gift. Use it." I used it to finish nursing school. I used it to pay off the debts my mother had left behind when she died. I used it to keep my grandmother's house, to pay the taxes and the maintenance, to preserve something that connected me to a past that otherwise felt like smoke dissolving in the air. I never saw him again. I read about him sometimes in the newspapers, the way you read about storms in other cities. His name was Dominic Verano, and he was the head of a family that had controlled certain parts of the city for 3 generations. And he was feared by people who feared very little else. I learned these things gradually, over the years, piecing together the picture of who I had saved that night in the diner, understanding slowly that the gift he had given me was not ordinary, that it carried with it an acknowledgement of something significant. When they arrested him 3 weeks ago, I read about that too. The charges were serious, the kind of charges that put men away for decades, and the bail had been set at a figure designed to be unreachable, $300,000 cash. The newspapers reported that his assets had been frozen, that his family was scrambling, that for the first time in memory, Dominic Verano was vulnerable. I thought about it for 2 days before I made the decision. I thought about the gift that had changed my life, and I thought about the note that had said this is not a debt, and I knew that he was right, that it was not a debt, that I did not owe him anything. But I also knew something else. Something I had learned in the years since that night in the diner. Some choices are not about debt or obligation or even gratitude. Some choices are about the kind of person you want to be when no one is watching and no one will ever know. The house sold for $280,000. I had been making payments on a small investment account for years, and that provided another $20,000. The rest came from selling everything else. My car, my furniture, my mother's jewelry, the few pieces that had meant something. I liquidated my entire existence and handed it to a bail bondsman who did not ask where the money came from, and I watched through the window of a coffee shop as the paperwork processed and the wheels of bureaucracy turned. No one knew. That was the essential thing. No one could know, because if he knew, he would try to stop it or repay it, and that would defeat the purpose. This was not about transaction. This was about something I could not name but understood in my bones. The shelter accepted me without questions, as I had hoped. I found a cot near the window in a room with 11 other women, each of us carrying damage we did not discuss. I unpacked my suitcase, hung my 2 sweaters on the hooks provided, folded my jeans into the small cubby that served as a closet. The photograph of my mother went under my pillow, where I could reach it in the dark if I needed to. I had a plan. I would find work, any work, and I would rebuild slowly. I had done it before when I was younger and had less. I could do it again. 3 weeks later, I found a job at St. Catherine's Hospital on the west side, night shifts in the emergency room. The work was brutal and endless and exactly what I needed. 12 hours of crisis that left no room for thinking about anything except the patient in front of me. I moved from the shelter to a room in a boarding house, a space just large enough for a bed and a dresser, with a shared bathroom down the hall and a hot plate I was not supposed to use but used anyway. I ate rice and beans because they were cheap and filling. I walked to work because the bus fare added up. I saved every dollar I could spare, and I did not think about him. That was the rule I had made for myself, and I kept it rigidly. When his name appeared in the news, I turned the page. When people at work discussed his trial, I left the room. I had given him what I could give, and now I needed to forget that I had ever done it. This worked for almost 2 months. Then, on a Tuesday, in early April, I arrived at work for my shift and found him standing in the hallway outside the emergency room. He looked different than I remembered, older and thinner, with lines around his eyes that had not been there 8 years ago. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and he was talking to Dr. Okonkwo, the head of emergency medicine, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture suggesting patience that did not reach his eyes. I stopped walking the moment I saw him, frozen in the middle of the corridor, my body refusing to move forward or backward. He saw me 3 seconds later. His conversation with Dr. Okonkwo paused mid-sentence, and his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart stop and then restart at twice its normal speed. He said something to the doctor, a few words I could not hear, and then he was walking toward me, crossing the distance between us with the kind of purpose that made people step out of his way without being asked. "Elena," he said. I had not told him my name. In all the years since that night in the diner, I had never told him my name, and he had never asked, and yet here he was saying it as though he had known it all along. "Mr. Verano." My voice was steady, which surprised me. Everything inside me felt like it was shaking apart, but my voice was steady. You work here. It was not a question. Yes. For how long? 7 weeks. He nodded slowly, as though this information confirmed something he had suspected. Then he looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and I understood that he was deciding something, weighing options I could not see. Walk with me, he said finally. I should have refused. I should have said that I was working, that I had patients to attend to, that whatever he wanted to discuss could be handled another time or through other channels. But I did not say any of those things. I followed him down the corridor and through a door marked staff only and into a stairwell where the sound of the hospital faded to a distant hum. He stopped on the landing between floors, his back against the wall, his eyes never leaving my face. The light. Here was harsh fluorescent, revealing everything. The exhaustion in his features, the tension in the set of his jaw, the way his hands remained perfectly still at his sides. I know what you did, he said. The words fell between us like stones dropped into still water. I felt them ripple outward, disturbing everything. I don't know what you mean. The bail! His voice was soft, almost gentle, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. $312,000, paid anonymously through a bondsman who is not typically employed by people in my circle. I spent 6 weeks trying to trace the source, and when I finally succeeded, I found the name of a woman who sold her grandmother's house, her car, and everything else she owned to secure the release of a man she had met once, 8 years ago, in a diner on the South Side. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Why? He asked. The question was simple, but the answer was not. I stood there in that stairwell, surrounded by concrete and fluorescent light, and I tried to find words for something that had never been about words. Because I could, I said finally, because no one else was going to do it, because... I stopped, searched for the truth, found it buried under layers of rationalization. Because you gave me something once, and it changed my life, and I had the chance to give something back, and I took it. I told you it was not a debt. It wasn't. This wasn't about debt. Then what was it about? I looked at him. This man who terrified cities, who commanded armies, who had built an empire on fear and respect and the careful application of violence. I looked at him, and I saw the same person I had seen 8 years ago in that diner, the one who had watched the street with attention that suggested vigilance, who had moved first when the danger came, who had taken the knife from my hand and told me to leave before I could become implicated in his survival. It was about choice, I said, about being the kind of person who does something when they can do something. That's all. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope, which he held out to me. This is a check for $312,000, made out to you, drawn on an account that cannot be traced. Take it. I did not reach for it. No. It is not negotiable. You cannot refuse. I can refuse anything I want. That's what choice means. His jaw tightened. I could see the frustration building behind his eyes, the unfamiliarity of being denied. You have nothing, he said. You are living in a boarding house and working night shifts and eating meals that consist primarily of rice and beans. I have had people watching you for 2 weeks. You sold everything you owned to free me from a cell, and now you are living like a person with nothing left to lose. This is not acceptable. It's not your decision to make. Why? His voice carried an edge now, something sharp and dangerous. Why would you do this and refuse the return? What do you want? I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. Not everyone. Not always. Sometimes people just do things because the things need to be done, and there's no calculation behind it, no expectation, no ledger being balanced. Sometimes it's just about being human. He stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression, something I could not identify, but that seemed important. Then he put the envelope back in his pocket, slowly, deliberately. You're going to leave this hospital, he said. Tonight, you are going to collect your things from your boarding house, and you are going to come with me. Excuse me? There are people who would like to know who paid my bail. They would like to find that person and use them against me, or hurt them to send a message, or any of a dozen other things that happen in the world I occupy. By doing what you did, you have made yourself A target, and I cannot allow a target to walk around unprotected. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not considered this. In all my planning, all my careful execution, I had not once considered that the act of helping him might put me in danger. Who? I asked. Who was looking? The Mancini family, the same people who sent men to that diner 8 years ago, the same people who have been trying to destroy me for as long as I can remember. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. They know someone paid my bail. They do not yet know who, but they are looking, and they will find you, and when they do, they will not be interested in conversation. I can take care of myself. You threw a knife at a man who was about to execute me. I do not doubt your courage, but courage is not the same as capability, and the people looking for you are not amateurs with guns in a diner. They are professionals who have been doing this work for generations. I thought about the women in the shelter, the ones who carried their damage in the set of their shoulders. I thought about all the ways the world could hurt you if it decided to try. How long? I asked. As long as it takes. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. I stood there in that stairwell, weighing options that felt increasingly narrow. I could fight, could insist on my independence, could cling to the remains of the life I was trying to rebuild, or I could accept that I had made a choice with consequences I had not anticipated and deal with those consequences as they came. Fine, I said. But I'm not quitting my job. Something flickered across his features, too fast to identify. We'll discuss that later. I finished my shift that night. I checked patients and administered medications and charted vital signs, and all the while I was aware of the 2 men stationed at the end of the corridor, watching without seeming to watch. When my shift ended at 7 in the morning, I walked out of the hospital and found a black car waiting at the curb. The driver was a woman, which surprised me. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair cut short and practical, and she did not introduce herself or make small talk. She simply opened the door and waited for me to get in. We drove north for almost an hour, leaving the city behind, passing through suburbs that gave way to farmland that gave way to forest. The house, when we finally reached it, was not what I expected. I had imagined something ostentatious, a mansion designed to display wealth. Instead, I found a stone structure that seemed to grow out of the landscape, surrounded by gardens that had been tended with obvious care. 3 checkpoints between the main road and the front door, men with guns who examined the car before waving us through. By the time we reached the house itself, I felt like I had crossed into a different country. He was waiting in the foyer. Mrs. Castellano will show you to your room, he said, gesturing to the gray-haired woman who had driven me. Dinner is at 7, if you choose to join. Mrs. Castellano led me up a staircase that curved toward the 2nd floor, past paintings that looked old and expensive, past doors that remained closed, past windows that revealed gardens I had not noticed from the driveway. The room she showed me was larger than my entire apartment had been, with windows that looked out over a lake I had not known existed. Bathroom through there, she said, pointing. Closet through there. There are clothes in your size. If anything is wrong, tell me and I will correct it. I didn't ask for clothes. No. She studied me with eyes that had clearly seen a great deal over the years. But you have them anyway. Dinner is optional, but Mr. Verano prefers company. Make of that what you will. She left. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by luxury I had not earned, and tried to understand how I had arrived at this moment. I did not go to dinner that first night. I stayed in my room, showered, put on the clothes that had been provided because my own clothes were dirty and insufficient, and lay on the bed watching the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I dreamed of diners and knives and the sound of glass breaking, and when I woke, it was dark outside and someone had left a tray of food by my door. The pattern established itself over the following days. I could go anywhere in the house and its grounds, could walk the gardens and explore the library and eat meals in the kitchen when the formal dining room felt too large. But I could not leave. The checkpoints that had let me in would not let me out, and every time I suggested returning to work, I was told that the situation had not yet been resolved. I saw him rarely at first, which surprised me. He seemed to have delegated my care to his staff and moved on to other concerns. I caught glimpses of him sometimes, crossing the foyer or leaving for meetings, always surrounded by men who deferred to him without question, but he did not seek me out. On the 5th day, I found Mrs. Castellano in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be enough food for an army. "Can I help?" I asked. She looked at me with an expression I could not read. "You want to help? I'm going insane with nothing to do." She handed me a knife and pointed at a pile of vegetables. "Make yourself useful then." We worked in silence for perhaps 20 minutes. Then, without looking up from the onion she was dicing, she said, "He doesn't know what to do with you." "What do you mean?" "In 40 years, I've never seen him uncertain. He knows exactly what he wants and exactly how to get it, but you—" She shook her head. "You are outside his experience. He does not know how to categorize you." "I don't need to be categorized." "No, but he needs to categorize things. It is how he survives." She set down her knife and turned to face me fully. "You saved his life twice. Once with a knife and once with money. Both times you asked for nothing in return. In his world, that does not happen. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. You are the first person in his adult life who has done something for him without expectation, and it has unsettled him more than he will ever admit." I thought about this as I continued chopping vegetables. I'm not trying to unsettle anyone. I know. That is what makes it worse. The conversation stayed with me through the rest of the day and into the night. I lay in my borrowed bed, in my borrowed room, wearing borrowed clothes, and I thought about what it meant to unsettle a man who had built his life on certainty. On the 9th day, I found him in the library. I had been looking for something to read, anything to occupy the hours that stretched empty in all directions, and there he was, standing by the window with a glass of something amber in his hand, watching the rain that had been falling since morning. "You don't sleep," he said without turning around. "Neither do you." "I have reasons." "So do I." He turned then, and I saw something in his face that I had not seen before. Tiredness, perhaps, or something closer to human than the mask he usually wore. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his. "Please." I sat. He remained standing for a moment longer, looking out at the rain, and then he crossed to the chair beside mine and lowered himself into it with the careful movements of someone whose body ached in ways he did not discuss. "Mrs. Castellano tells me you have been helping in the kitchen. She lets me. It gives me something to do. She has not let anyone help her in 30 years. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "There has been a development," he said after a long pause, "regarding the people who are looking for you." My stomach tightened. "What kind of development?" "They have identified the bondsman who processed the payment. They have not yet traced it back to you, but it is only a matter of time. A few days, perhaps a week." He swirled the liquid in his glass, watching the way it caught the light. "When they find you, they will not hesitate. The Mancinis are not subtle people. They believe in messages, in examples, in making sure everyone understands the consequences of crossing them." "What does that mean? Specifically?" He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been respect or might have been sorrow. "It means they will hurt you, badly and publicly. It means they will film it and send it to me to remind me that I am not untouchable. It means that if you leave this house before I have dealt with them, you will die, and your death will be designed to cause me pain." The words landed like blows, each one driving the air from my lungs. I had known, abstractly, that I was in danger, but hearing it stated so plainly, so matter-of-factly, made it real in a way it had not been before. "Then deal with them," I said. "You're Dominic Verano. Everyone is afraid of you. Make them afraid enough to stop looking." "It is not that simple." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. "Because I'm tired," he said. "Because I have been fighting this war for 20 years, and I do not know how to end it without becoming the thing I despise. Because every time I destroy one enemy, another rises to take their place, and I am running out of the will to keep destroying." He looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of years of violence. "You asked me once what I wanted. I want peace. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want one day, just one, where I do not have to calculate who might be trying to kill me." I did not know what to say. This was not the man I had read about in newspapers, the monster who terrified cities. This was someone else, someone human, someone who carried burdens I could not imagine. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I didn't mean to make things harder." "You didn't. You made them different. That is not the same thing." He reached for his glass, took a long drink, set it down again. I have a plan. It will take time, and it will require patience, and there is no guarantee it will work. But if it does, the Mancinis will no longer be a threat to either of us. What kind of plan? The kind I cannot tell you about. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowledge is dangerous, and I will not put more danger in your hands than you already carry. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand details, explanations, some semblance of control over my own fate. But I looked at him, at the lines around his eyes and the tension in his shoulders, and the way he held himself like a man who had not rested in years, and I found I could not. How long? I asked instead. Weeks, perhaps months. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you. Stay here. You help Mrs. Castellano in the kitchen if that brings you peace. You read the books in this library, of which there are many. You walk the gardens when the weather permits, and you trust me to do what needs to be done. It was not a satisfactory answer. It was not even close to satisfactory, but it was the only answer I was going to get, and I recognized the truth of it, the weight of everything he was not saying. Okay, I said. I'll trust you. Something shifted in his expression, a softening I had not expected. Thank you. The weeks that followed were strange and suspended, existing outside normal time. I fell into a routine. Mornings in the garden, afternoons in the library, evenings in the kitchen with Mrs. Castellano. We did not speak much, but the silence between us was comfortable, the kind that comes from shared work and mutual respect. He appeared more often now, seeking out my company in ways that surprised me. He would find me in the library and sit in the chair beside mine, reading while I read, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with words. He would walk through the gardens in the early morning before the day's demands claimed him, and sometimes I would see him from my window and go down to join him. We talked about books mostly. He had strong opinions about literature that I had not expected, preferences that revealed a mind more nuanced than his reputation suggested. He liked Dostoevsky and despised Hemingway. He read poetry, though he would not admit it. He had once, he told me, wanted to be a professor. What happened? I asked. My father died. I inherited the family business. You could have walked away. No. He shook his head slowly. I couldn't. Not then. Maybe not ever. There are debts that cannot be repaid and obligations that cannot be refused. This is one of them. I thought about my own debts, my own obligations. The grandmother's house I had sold. The mother whose photograph I still kept under my pillow. The choice I had made in a diner 8 years ago that had led, through chains of consequence I could never have predicted, to this moment. I understand, I said. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. I believe you do. On the 37th day, everything changed. I was in the kitchen with Mrs. Castellano when we heard the gunshots, 3 of them, sharp and close, followed by shouting and the sound of running feet. Mrs. Castellano grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the pantry, a small room in the back of the kitchen with walls thick enough to stop bullets. Stay here, she said, her voice low and urgent. Do not come out until I come for you. She closed the door behind her, and I was alone in the darkness, listening to the chaos unfold beyond the walls. More gunshots, more shouting, a sound that might have been glass breaking, and then, worst of all, silence. I waited in that pantry for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. I pressed my ear against the door and tried to hear something, anything that would tell me what was happening. But there was only silence, heavy and complete, like the world had stopped turning. The door opened. I flinched back, expecting enemies, expecting violence. Instead, I found him standing in the doorway, blood on his shirt and a cut above his eye, and something in his expression that I could not identify. It's over, he said. What happened? The Mancinis found us. Not you. Us. The house. They sent men. He paused, and I saw his hands trembling slightly, the first sign of weakness I had ever witnessed. The men are dead. All of them. But they will send more. We need to leave. We left that night, traveling in a convoy of black cars to another house, this one smaller and more remote, hidden in mountains I had never known existed. The next weeks were a blur of movement, of safe houses and midnight departures, of watching him conduct a war from borrowed rooms with borrowed phones. I learned things about him during that time. I learned that he was ruthless when he needed to be, capable of ordering violence without flinching. but I also learned that he hated it, that each decision cost him something he could not name. I learned that he barely slept, that he ate only when Mrs. Castellano forced him to, that he carried the weight of responsibility like a physical burden that bent his shoulders and aged his face. I learned, too, that he was watching me, not with suspicion, but with something else, something that made my heart beat faster when our eyes met across a room. On the 52nd day, in a cabin in the mountains with snow falling outside, he kissed me. It was not planned. We had been arguing about something stupid, something I cannot even remember now, and the argument had escalated into something else, something charged and dangerous. He was standing close to me, too close, his voice low and intense, and I was pushing back, refusing to give ground, and then suddenly his hand was on the back of my neck and his mouth was on mine, and the argument dissolved into something that had no words. He pulled back almost immediately, his expression shocked as though his own body had betrayed him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't," I said. "Don't apologize." We stood there, inches apart, breathing hard, the snow falling silently beyond the window. I could see the conflict in his face, the war between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Probably. I'm not a good man. I know. I have done terrible things. I will do more terrible things. The life I lead is violent and dangerous, and there is a significant chance that I will not survive the year. I know that too." He reached out, his hand hovering near my face, not quite touching. "Why aren't you running?" I thought about the question, really thought about it. I thought about everything I knew about him, everything I had learned in the weeks we had spent together, the violence and the gentleness, the power and the exhaustion, the way he looked at me like I was something precious, something worth protecting. "Because I don't want to," I said, "because for the first time in a very long time, I am exactly where I want to be." His hand touched my face then, his fingers tracing my cheekbone, my jaw, the curve of my throat. The touch was so gentle it made me want to cry. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be with someone. Not really, not in any way that matters." "Neither do I. We could destroy each other, or we could save each other, again." He kissed me then, and this time he did not pull away. The war ended 6 weeks later. I do not know all the details. I do not want to know, but I know that people died, that deals were made, that the Mancini family ceased to be a threat through means I chose not to examine too closely. I know that he came home one night, exhausted and hollow-eyed, and told me it was over. I know that he held me in the darkness of our bedroom and shook with something that might have been relief, or might have been grief, or might have been both. We built a life after that, slowly and carefully, like people learning to walk after a long illness. I returned to nursing at a small clinic in a town near the house that had become our home. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his empire, delegating to lieutenants he trusted, focusing instead on the legitimate businesses that had always existed alongside the illegitimate ones. Mrs. Castellano stayed. She ran the household with the same quiet efficiency she had always shown, and she watched us with eyes that seemed to approve of what she saw. We married on a spring morning in the garden I had come to love, with only a handful of witnesses. I wore a simple dress that Mrs. Castellano had helped me choose. He wore a suit that fit him like armor, though for once he did not seem to need armor. "Wife," he said, later that night, testing the word. "Husband," I replied. He found my grandmother's house, the one I had sold to pay his bail. He bought it back and put it in my name, and when I protested, he said only, "It is not a gift. It is a correction." I did not argue. The years passed. The violence receded, though it never disappeared entirely. There were still threats, still enemies, still moments when I woke in the night to find him already awake, watching the darkness like a man who expected it to produce monsters. But there was also peace, or something close to it. There were mornings in the garden and evenings in the library. There were meals around a table that no longer felt too large. There were quiet conversations about books and philosophy and the nature of choice. And there was love. Not the love of fairy tales, not the love of easy redemption, but something harder, something earned, something that had been forged in the fire of mutual sacrifice and emerged stronger for the burning. On our 3rd anniversary, I found him in the library standing by the window as he had been standing that first day, watching the rain that seemed to fall more often here than anywhere else. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. The diner, he said. The knife. The way you looked when you stood up. Like you were surprised by your own courage. I was surprised. I didn't know I could do that. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had learned to recognize. Love, yes, but also gratitude and something deeper, something that had no name. You saved my life, he said, 3 times now. Once with the knife, once with the money, and once by simply being here, by refusing to let me become the monster everyone expected me to be. I crossed the room and took his hand, the same hand that had done terrible things, the same hand that had touched me with such gentleness. You saved mine too, I said, maybe not from death, but from something worse, from becoming invisible, from forgetting that I was worth saving. He pulled me close, and we stood there together, watching the rain fall on the garden that had become our home. I love you, he said. I know. I love you too. And we stayed there, the two of us, as the rain fell and the light faded and another day ended in the life we had built together. A life that was imperfect and complicated and sometimes difficult. A life that was ours. I would not have traded it for anything. I still have my mother's photograph, though I no longer keep it under my pillow. It sits on my dresser now in a frame that matches the room, where I can see it every morning when I wake and every night before I sleep. Sometimes I tell her about my life, about the choices I have made, about the man who sleeps beside me and the home we have created. I like to think she would understand. I like to think she would be proud. The bail money was never repaid. He tried in those early days to return it in various ways, but I refused every attempt. It was not about money. It was never about money. It was about choice, about the kind of person I wanted to be, about the belief that sometimes you do things not because they make sense, but because they are the only things you can do. He understood eventually. He stopped trying to repay and started trying to deserve, which was different and harder and exactly right. I still work at the clinic 3 days a week. I still help Mrs. Castellano in the kitchen when she allows it, which is more often now. I still walk the gardens in the morning, though now I rarely walk alone. This is my life. It is not the life I imagined, not the life I planned. It is better, it is harder, it is mine. And it all started with a knife on the floor of a diner and a choice I did not know I was making. Some choices change everything. Some choices are everything. This one was both.